Thanks, Senator Stevens. Senator
Can
Pratt.
I ask, with respect to the redesign, I know it's designed to be broader and more flexible in nature. One, how you intend to identify priority areas of funding, and do you expect that any organisations currently funded under the redesign, under the current design, will no longer be eligible for funding under the new program?
Are you specifically referring to the community, strengthening communities?
Yes, in this case I am, with particular example being volunteer management.
Volunteer management, it will have to change to meet the redesign program. There's two elements to it. I'll get the officers that are, have that information, but just broadly, the two elements of that new component include volunteer grants of $10 million, and they're unchanged.
I'm not interested in those.
But they
it's the
will have to...
volunteer support services that I'm concerned will be ineligible, and I understand they might be ineligible because they're not directly targeting the outcomes in question. They're providing the support services to organisations that might be.
The issue that goes to that redesign is that the services that you're talking about, there isn't a constitutional, we don't have authority to fund those particular activities. So what we're trying to do in that redesign is to find the programs or the activities.
So what's the nature of the constitutional question in relation to volunteer support? Because it's not welfare oriented, is that right?
Well, there isn't an appropriate head of power or legislation that says that this is the remit that the Commonwealth can do some funding in.
So, sorry, what's the difference in terms of volunteer services versus other welfare issues? Just explain this technical difference.
It's not the volunteer services, it was the nature of those activities.
Even Lewis, Group Manager, Multicultural Settlement Services and Communities, it was a particular nature of the services and activities undertaken under that particular grant. I understand that Ms Sims was party to a conversation that you were at recently. I'll hand over to Ms Sims.
So in terms of the constitutional issues, I don't think there's anything in particular in relation to volunteer services that would be different from any other grant funding arrangement that has constitutional issues. But in terms of the...
So why is this coming out specifically?
So we're redesigning the Strengthening Communities activity, and it will
in a way that would make these services ineligible?
No.
Okay.
So let me just explain
All right, that's
what
great.
I think
Hopefully
might be
they will still be eligible. I just want you to assure me that that's the case.
So state volunteering peaks are not presently funded by the Department of Social Services.
No, I understand that.
In their capacity as peaks. So they have been funded to provide specific volunteer support services, as you said, and we anticipate that under the new redesigned program, these organisations will be invited to apply for funding to provide specific services again. So we anticipate that the services provided under the Strong and Resilient Communities will have a stronger focus on building community resilience in accordance with the government's objectives. Okay,
now I understand all of that, but what I don't understand is whether you can provide volunteer support services. So, for example, an organisation might be applying for funding so they can have a volunteer program that targets disadvantaged communities, but what they won't have under this program is the volunteer support services that they would otherwise be relying on to provide a program like that, including the recruitment of the volunteers themselves, potentially.
So my understanding is that infrastructure actually relates to the funding of the peaks.
No, these are volunteer services that have a regional fabric currently right around the country, where you've got volunteer service organisations who are doing things like providing constitutional advice, occupational health and safety, working with children type checks, and doing those support services so that organisations doing the grassroots volunteering are able to do that. Because as you understand, it's an increasingly complicated environment for voluntary organisations, and that they need that professional support in order to sustain their voluntary activities.
Sorry, please correct me, but the restructure will actually allow capacity building.
That's right.
That's built in, and that type of thing that you're talking about is actually about the building of the capacity of that sector, and that's not going to be, that's going to be very allowable under the new restructure.
That's right. Okay, so existing services should be eligible to apply to do the same kinds of things that they're currently doing.
They'll be able to apply under a different envelope.
I don't care about the envelope. I understand it's a bigger envelope and people will be in the same pot together. I can't promise you that this group will continue to be funded. I'm not asking for the...
So
I'm asking if they will be eligible to apply for funding and whether their services will be able to compete against the other programs.
The answer that we can give you is that illustrative model that you gave about capacity building to support the sector is not being precluded under the new arrangements.
And will that include volunteer support for sporting organisations, environmental organisations that might be outside the social services that you're targeting under this Strengthening Communities type program?
So the new program would be under three broad areas: community resilience grants, which cover a broad spectrum, targeted to communities showing potential or early signs of low social cohesion, and a range of activities would cover under there. Inclusive communities, so community organisations which address a significant need within a community, and it might be about vulnerable citizens, people with disability, a range of issues there. National projects and research. So they're the three...
So it won't include sporting organisations unless they're targeted at people that are disadvantaged, or environmental works, or say, for example, other organisations that might like to recruit volunteers.
So I'm not certain that we used to fund them, sporting organisations just per se.
No,
they
you
had
don't
a role,
fund
a contribution.
Supporting organisations per se. You fund volunteer support services that might in turn support those organisations.
Well, the capacity building for those, the issues that Mr. Lewis said has been a bit of a long-standing priority about disadvantage, or it could be some of the sporting groups that we have funded have focused on reducing violence against women and respectful relationships, being inclusive for young Indigenous people. So there's been an array of support for sports organisations, but in their social good that they do within their communities in those areas of disadvantage and discrimination.
And they'll still be eligible to do that work under this new program.
I think it's very hard to answer a question
so you don't know
without a specific example. If the way this, I think you need to put the question on notice.
I don't think we can answer your question definitively.
But you must know what kinds of services are funded currently and whether they will be able to be funded, albeit in a bigger pot of money, competing against other programs to do the same kinds of things that they're currently doing. Is the answer yes or no?
So I don't think we can answer your question.
So you don't know yet because the process isn't complete?
Well, that's part of it. We are quite conscious of the issue which you're concerned about, and pretty much we share your concerns, and we are engaged in a process where we are trying to find ways to maintain, to the extent we can, the beneficial aspects of this while not being in breach of the outcomes of these
okay. Can I ask with
cases.
respect to